I was still trembling when the doorbell rang the second time. Not a polite press, an angry, deliberate buzz that seemed to stretch the air itself. My hand hovered over the peephole, heart hammering so hard I could hear blood in my ears. Through the wood, I heard the scrape of boots on brick, the whisper of radios, and a voice trying to sound official. Police. Open up! 2 words I'd never wanted to hear. The voice had weight, but it didn't have rhythm. It was too rehearsed, too stiff, like a bad actor trying to sound like authority. My stomach sank even before I pulled the chain lock and cracked the door. 2 men stood there in dark uniforms. The taller one, 6 feet at least, had a clean-shaven jaw and eyes that slid past me, never quite meeting mine. His partner was shorter, his smile nervous, his grip tight on the handcuffs at his belt. Both had badges that gleamed so brightly under the porch light, they looked like they'd been polished 5 minutes earlier. "Joshua Roberts?" the tall one asked. "Yes? You're under arrest." "Step outside." "Hands where we can see them." I froze. "Arrested? For what?" My brain scrambled through every possible explanation. Unpaid taxes, mistaken identity, some neighbor complaint blown out of proportion. Nothing made sense. The taller one, whose tag read Tony, held out a folder. "Warrant," he said, his voice flat. The folder trembled in his grip. I looked down and felt the bottom of my world shift. The words HOA violations were stamped across the top in block letters. HOA! They were trying to arrest me for HOA violations? My chest tightened. "This is insane," I stammered, backing up. Palms sweating. That's when Sandra appeared. My wife of 12 years, Sandra, who watched baking shows in pajamas every night, who wore fuzzy socks and tied her hair up with a pencil, stepped into the hallway. But the woman who looked at those 2 men wasn't the woman I knew. Her face was cold, her voice low and commanding. "Gentlemen," she said, "step back for my husband." They didn't move. The shorter one slid the cuff from his belt, stepped forward and grabbed my wrist. The metal bit into my skin. "Don't interfere, ma'am," he snapped. I expected Sandra to panic, to scream, to run for the phone. Instead, she moved. It happened so fast I barely saw it, her wrist twisting, her shoulder dropping, her whole body shifting in one smooth arc. In a single motion, the short man was yanked forward, flipped, and slammed chest first against the hallway table. His fake badge clattered across the floor. He let out a strangled yelp. Tony reached for his belt, fumbling for something that looked like a holster. But before his hand touched it, Sandra's elbow drove into his ribs with brutal precision. He crumpled against the doorframe, gasping for air. Sandra's phone was already mounted on the foyer shelf. She double-tapped the screen. A red light blinked to life. "Recording," she said coldly. "You're committing felony fraud." The shorter man scrambled to his feet and bolted out the door, sprinting down the driveway like a hunted animal. Tony groaned, clutching his ribs, too stunned to move, and I just stood there, staring at the woman I thought I'd married. The woman who had just dismantled 2 armed men like it was muscle memory. For the first time in 12 years, I realized I didn't know her at all. But the truth is, this didn't start tonight. It started months ago with a deck, $8,000 of cedar. Perfectly cut, sanded, and polished until the boards gleamed in the sun. I'd hired Michael Carter, the contractor everyone in Maple Ridge trusted, to build it. 3 weeks of work, every nail precise, every line clean. It was my surprise for Sandra on our 12th anniversary. When she came home that Friday evening, briefcase still in her hand, she stopped at the edge of the yard. Her eyes widened. She slipped her shoes off and stepped onto the deck barefoot. "Josh," she whispered, this is really something. That weekend we hosted a barbecue. Patricia Wilson from next door brought her famous potato salad. Even the Johnsons from across the street, who hadn't joined a neighborhood gathering in years, showed up. People admired the craftsmanship, the way it elevated our corner lot. But Sandra kept checking her phone. Every buzz drew her eyes away from the compliments. Her fingers danced across the screen like she was conducting an invisible orchestra. She smiled when spoken to, nodded at the right moments, but she wasn't really there. I told myself it was work. On Monday morning, the violation notice arrived, $200 per day. Unauthorized construction exceeding maximum deck height by 6 inches. 6 inches. I read it 3 times, thinking maybe fatigue had blurred the words. But no. They claimed the deck was too tall, in violation of Maple Ridge HOA code. Michael rushed over, blueprints under his arm, tape measure in hand. He measured 3 times, shaking his head. "Josh, this is exact. 36 inches, legal maximum's 38. Teresa approved the plans herself. Teresa Edwards, our HOA president. Widow, according to neighborhood gossip. Always precise, always smiling, always watching. But when I showed Sandra the letter, she barely glanced at it. Just tear it down and rebuild, she said. Her tone was casual, almost dismissive, as though we were deciding what to order for dinner. I gaped at her. Tear it down? After 3 weeks of work? After Teresa signed the plans? Her eyes didn't flinch. It's not worth it, Josh. Trust me. Trust her, the woman who'd pretended surprise at the deck I'd been planning for months. The woman who now wanted to erase it. Something was wrong. That afternoon, Mrs. Wilson leaned over the fence while I was watering the lawn. Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted her tape measure. 3 families, she whispered, glancing toward Teresa's immaculate house. 3 families left Maple Ridge after building additions. All corner lots. All used the same contractor. Her eyes held mine for a moment, then she patted my arm. Be careful. She didn't explain further. But her words echoed in my mind long after she shuffled back inside. That night, Sandra sat at the dining room table with papers spread across it. But these weren't Social Security forms, the kind she normally worked on. I glimpsed photographs of houses, timestamps scribbled in margins, notes about financial transfers. Long day? I asked, keeping my voice light. She jumped, then swept the papers into her briefcase with alarming speed. Just backlog, she muttered. I went to bed uneasy. At 2 a.m, I woke to silence. Sandra's side of the bed was empty. Her car keys were gone, through the blinds. I caught the glow of our BMW's taillights slipping down Maple Ridge Drive. My wife, who processed disability paperwork for a living, was sneaking out in the middle of the night. The next morning, Michael returned with a folder. His face was pale, his voice low. Josh, I need you to see this. Inside were documents from his last 3 jobs, the Rodriguez family on Oak Street, the Patels on Birch, the Kowalskis on Elm. All had received violation notices after his work. All were forced to sell within months. I thought it was coincidence, he said quietly. But 3 families in 18 months? All corner lots? Now you? My stomach clenched. A pattern. But the strangest part came that evening when Sandra came home early. She walked straight to the deck, stared at it for a long moment, then turned to me. Tear it down this weekend, she said firmly. I'll help you. Her voice was hard. Not a suggestion. A command. No, I said. We fight this. Something flickered across her face, fear. Anger? I couldn't tell. Her phone buzzed. She slipped into the garage to take the call. Through the window, I watched her pacing, gesturing, her face drawn tight with stress. When she came back inside, she was different. Do what you want about the deck, she said flatly. I have work to do. She locked herself in the home office, and I stood staring at the deck, at the shadows stretching across its cedar boards, wondering if I'd just stepped into something much bigger than wood and nails. The crowd's whispers didn't fade when Karen stormed off into the night. If anything, they grew louder. Neighbors huddled together, voices carrying words like felony, lawsuit, and champion cat. I carried Lightning back inside, his golden fur glowing under the porch light like a trophy reclaimed from enemy hands. But I knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot, because Karen wasn't the kind of person who accepted humiliation. She was the kind who fed on power, and when it slipped through her fingers, she clawed even harder. I'd seen it before, in smaller doses. Before that night, Lightning had been her obsession in quieter, pettier ways. It started a year earlier. I'd brought Lightning home after his 2nd state championship. The trophies were heavy, but the real weight was the pride. Neighbors came by with congratulations, kids lined up to pet him, and even the local paper snapped a photo. Karen hadn't congratulated me. She'd filed a violation notice. Improper display of personal items in a shared community view, the paper read. The items? My cat's trophies sitting on the porch for a single afternoon. At first, I laughed it off. But then came another notice. Unsanctioned structure on property. The structure? Lightning's custom scratching post, tucked discreetly against the side fence. Each time, I shrugged, filed the notice away, and went on with my life. But Karen wasn't just irritated. She was jealous. Every new award Lightning won, every photo neighbors shared online, every cheer from kids who adored him, it chipped away at her sense of control. The HOA was her kingdom. The clubhouse, her throne room. And my cat was stealing her spotlight. I still remember the first time she cracked in public. It was at the spring HOA meeting. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, folding chairs scraped against the linoleum floor, and the air was thick with the smell of weak coffee. Karen strutted to the podium, blazer stiff, lipstick bright, clipboard raised like a sword. "First order of business," she began, her voice sharp. "Community standards regarding pets." I sat in the back row, Lightning's carrier resting quietly by my chair. Neighbors leaned forward, sensing the storm. Karen launched into her speech. "There have been issues," she said, her eyes flicking toward me, "with certain residents failing to follow guidelines. Outdoor pets roaming freely, excessive noise." And she hesitated, lips curling, "public displays that are not in line with community values." The room murmured. One neighbor raised a hand. "Karen, are you talking about the champion cat? The one that made the paper?" A ripple of chuckles spread. Karen's jaw twitched. "This isn't about one animal," she snapped. "It's about rules. Rules exist for a reason. Without them, we descend into chaos," another voice chimed in, old Mrs. Dunbar from Lot 14. "Chaos? Karen, it's a cat. The sweetest cat in the neighborhood. You're making a mountain out of a fur ball." Laughter broke out. Even the treasurer chuckled behind his hand. Karen's face flushed red, but she pressed on. "This is a violation of HOA bylaws," she barked. I stood then, calm and slow, every eye turning toward me. Lightning stretched inside his carrier, his amber eyes glowing like fire through the mesh. "With respect," I said, voice steady, "the bylaws don't ban pets. They ban neglect. They ban nuisance. Lightning isn't neglected, and he isn't a nuisance. He's loved. He's cared for. And he's brought this community more joy than any clipboard ever could." The room erupted in applause. Phones rose, recording. Karen slammed her clipboard against the podium so hard the sound echoed like a gavel. "Order!" she screamed. But the order was gone. That night was the first crack in her crown. And she never forgave me for it. From that point on, the notices multiplied. Too many to count. Grass half an inch too long. Decorative lights in violation of season. Unauthorized signage when I put up a small "Go Lightning" banner before a championship. Each notice went into my folder, labeled in neat handwriting, "Karen's Crusade." At first, I thought she was just power-hungry. But as Lightning's fame grew, so did the stakes. Breeders offered me contracts. Judges sent invitations. Local news called me the man with the $50,000 cat. And Karen? She seethed. I saw it in the way her eyes narrowed at block parties, the way she cut conversations short if Lightning came up, the way she scribbled on her clipboard whenever kids gathered to watch him strut. So when she stole him that night, I shouldn't have been surprised. I should have expected it, but I'll admit it. Part of me had underestimated just how far she was willing to go because stealing Lightning wasn't her endgame. It was just her opening move. The very next morning, a bright yellow envelope appeared on my door. Not the usual white notice. This one was stamped with bold red letters. Final warning, the violation. Unauthorized animal harboring. Immediate removal required. My jaw tightened as I read it. Immediate removal. They were escalating. I glanced down at Lightning, lounging in the sunbeam on the living room rug, blissfully unaware of the war unfolding around him. His tail flicked once, slow and regal, and I realized something. Karen wasn't just trying to control me. She was trying to erase Lightning, erase everything he represented, and I wasn't about to let that happen. The yellow envelope stayed on my counter like a snake waiting to strike. Every time I walked past it, the words "final warning" screamed louder. Karen wasn't bluffing anymore. She was escalating, but here's the thing about living under constant fire. You either break or you build armor. and I'd been building armor for months. In the corner of my study sat a battered black binder. On the cover, one word: receipts. Inside, carefully organized by date, were every violation notice, every photo of lightning playing harmlessly in the yard, every screenshot of Karen's rants on the HOA Facebook group. Even audio clips neighbors whispering how Karen bragged about putting that cat lover in his place. It wasn't paranoia. It was preparation, because Karen's pattern was predictable. She'd always go one step further than anyone thought she would. And sure enough, she did. 3 days after the final warning, a white van pulled into the cul-de-sac. The side read Animal Control. 2 officers stepped out, clipboards in hand, moving with the stiff professionalism of men who'd been called for nonsense, but still had to follow procedure. I opened the door before they even knocked. Lightning sat behind me, perched like royalty on the arm of the sofa, eyes glowing amber in the morning sun. "Sir," one of the officers said, adjusting his cap, "we've received a complaint. Something about a dangerous or neglected animal on this property." The words almost made me laugh. Lightning? Dangerous? The cat who once refused to chase a mouse because it would mess up his fur? But I held the smile in. Instead, I handed them a folder already waiting by the door. Vet records, vaccinations, certificates of health. "And while you're at it," I slid in a glossy magazine, "Meet the Midwest Champion." The officers flipped through the pages. Lightning staring out in full-page spreads. Ribbons draped across his back. Contracts signed by breeders worth more than their annual salary. The taller officer raised an eyebrow. "This the same cat the complaint's about?" "Yup," I said. Lightning meowed on cue, stretching his paws like he was posing for another cover. The officers chuckled. "Well, doesn't look neglected to me. Looks like he's got a better health care plan than I do." They turned serious, though, as they made their notes. "Sir, for what it's worth, off the record we've been called here 3 times this month. Same address, same complainant." My stomach tightened. "Karen," they exchanged glances. "If it continues, we'll have to file a report. False claims waste county resources." I nodded, thanked them, and watched the van pull away. Across the street, Karen stood on her porch, arms folded, face twisted into something between a scowl and a smile. She'd expected me to panic. Instead, I'd embarrassed her again. That was the day I decided to escalate, too. That night, I installed 2 trail cameras, one tucked in the hedge facing my driveway, another hidden near the porch light. Silent, unblinking eyes recording everything. It didn't take long. On the second night, just after midnight, the cameras caught movement. A figure in a dark jacket creeping across my lawn. At first glance, it looked like a teenager on a dare. But then the light caught the hair, stiff, sprayed, unmistakable. Karen. She crouched near the flower bed, flashlight flicking. And then I saw it. She was photographing my porch. Not trash, not noise, just Lightning's empty scratching post. The audacity made me laugh out loud as I rewound the footage. She was desperate, so desperate she was fabricating evidence. The next morning, she doubled down again. A new notice, this one more creative. Violation, health hazard. It claimed that Lightning's presence outdoors was attracting stray cats, creating a public sanitation risk. The irony? Karen was the one prowling around like a stray at midnight. I printed the footage, slipped it into my binder, and waited. Because I knew her next move wouldn't be just paper. She was cornered now, humiliated twice. And cornered people don't retreat, they lash out. And lash out she did. The following weekend, the HOA hosted its monthly safety patrol walk. Usually it was just Karen and 2 bored volunteers with flashlights strolling around pretending to enforce rules. But this time was different. 5 people showed up. Clipboards, reflective vests. One even carried a walkie-talkie like he was auditioning for Mall Cop of the Year. I watched from my porch as they huddled, whispering, eyes darting toward my house. Lightning sat beside me, tail flicking, completely unbothered. Then they made their move. The group marched straight up my driveway. Karen at the front, chest puffed, waving her clipboard like a warrant. "By order of the HOA Safety Committee," she announced, loud enough for the neighbors to hear, "this animal is being seized for community protection." I stood slowly, heart pounding but my voice calm. Karen, step 1 foot closer and you're trespassing. Step 2 feet closer and you're committing theft. The neighbors were already outside, phones raised. The same officers who'd been called for fake complaints were watching this video feed in real time because my cameras were live streaming to a secure server. Karen's face twitched, but she didn't stop. Her little squad took another step. That's when I pulled out my own clipboard, black leather. Inside, every laminated page of receipts, and at the top printed photos of Karen herself, trespassing in the dead of night, flashlight in hand. The crowd gasped as I held them high. Funny, I said, voice booming, you call this animal a danger. But I've got proof the real danger is a president who breaks onto private property at midnight. Proof you're lying. Proof you're abusing your position. Proof that ends tonight, Karen froze. The squad shifted uneasily, eyes darting between her and the growing audience. And then, like a final nail, I dropped the line that turned the tide. You wanted a neighborhood patrol? Congratulations. Tonight, the whole neighborhood gets to patrol you. Phones zoomed in. The crowd cheered. Karen's patrol scattered, vests flapping as they retreated. And Karen herself? She stood there shaking, her empire crumbling piece by piece, but she still didn't give up. She hissed at me, voice sharp as broken glass. This isn't over. You'll regret humiliating me. I stroked lightning, calm as ever, while my cameras captured every second. What she didn't know was that regret was coming, but not for me. For her. Because the very next move would take us out of the cul-de-sac and into the courtroom. The neighborhood was still buzzing the morning after Karen's safety patrol collapsed. Phones had captured every angle, her stomping across my driveway, her little army retreating, my binder of receipts glowing under porch lights like a sword of truth. By sunrise, the videos were already bouncing around local Facebook groups. HOA president caught trespassing. Neighborhood cat worth more than Karen's Lexus. Memes sprouted like weeds. Someone even edited Lightning's face onto a superhero poster, the $50,000 feline versus the clipboard queen. But Karen didn't laugh. She doubled down. That afternoon, a sheriff's cruiser rolled into the cul-de-sac. The deputy stepped out slow, hand resting on his belt, scanning the crowd of neighbors who had already gathered like it was a block party. Karen marched beside him, chin high, brandishing a thick folder of papers. There, she snapped, pointing at me. That's the man. He's violating HOA rules, endangering the community and obstructing enforcement. The deputy turned to me, unreadable. Sir, can we talk? I stayed calm. Lightning purred in my arms, tail flicking like a metronome of defiance. Of course, I said, stepping forward. But let's do it by the book. Karen shoved her folder into the deputy's hands. Everything is here, complaints, notices, bylaws. He refuses to comply. He even threatened me. The deputy flipped through, his brow furrowing. Half the evidence was nonsense. Photos of my porch, a blurry shot of lightning through the blinds, and printouts of Karen's own violation notices. Then I pulled out my binder. And here's mine. Receipts, deputy. Video footage of Karen trespassing at midnight. False complaints documented by animal control. Neighbors ready to testify. And I slipped in the glossy magazine spread, proof that the animal in question is a $50,000 registered champion cat. The deputy's jaw tightened. He closed Karen's folder, handed it back without a word, and studied me for a long moment. Sir, he said finally, you're within your rights. This isn't a criminal matter against you, Karen exploded. What do you mean? He's breaking the rules. He's mocking this entire community. The deputy turned to her, his tone sharper now. Ma'am, trespassing is criminal. Filing false reports is criminal. You might want to think carefully about how you proceed, the crowd gasped. Someone muttered, Uh-oh, Karen. Phones zoomed in. Karen's face blazed red, but she didn't retreat. If the sheriff won't enforce the law, she snapped, the HOA will, and with that she stormed off, her heels cracking against the pavement like gunfire. That was the day I knew she'd try something bigger, something reckless. And I was right. A week later, I received a certified letter. This wasn't another notice, it was a summons. The HOA, under Karen's signature, was suing me for breach of community bylaws and endangering neighborhood safety. The number at the bottom made me laugh. They wanted damages of $25,000 for what? For owning a cat they couldn't control. Neighbors flooded my porch with offers to testify. Old Mrs. Dunbar baked a pie for luck. Kids drew lightning on poster board like he was their mascot. Even the mailman muttered, "They've gone too far this time." But the most powerful support came from a man I barely knew, Frank Reynolds, a quiet neighbor from the end of the street. He was a retired county clerk, the kind of man who knew records inside and out. "I've seen their filings," Frank told me, sliding a stack of papers across my kitchen table. "Karen's bylaw amendments, they were never passed with quorum. Half of them are unenforceable. And this lawsuit," he tapped the header, "it's built on sand." That night, I prepared my binder like a soldier polishing armor. Photos, videos, vet records, contracts, bylaws with Frank's notes scrawled across them. Every page laminated, every date highlighted, and then the day came. The courtroom smelled of dust and old wood polish, a cathedral of judgment where lies melted under the weight of truth. Karen strutted in first, heels clicking, blazer sharp, a smile plastered on her face like she'd already won. Behind her, 2 HOA board members trailed nervously, clutching their own papers. I walked in calmly. Lightning's photo tucked inside my case, his champion ribbon clipped to the first page. The judge took the bench, gavel cracking like thunder. "This court will hear the case of Maple Ridge HOA versus..." He glanced at my name regarding alleged violations and damages. Karen sprang to her feet. "Your Honor, this man has mocked our rules, endangered our peace, and refuses to comply with the standards of our community. We demand justice!" Her voice echoed, shrill, desperate. The judge raised an eyebrow, but gestured for her to continue. She rattled off a litany of violations, each one thinner than the last. Photos of Lightning sitting in sunbeams, complaints about excessive fur in common areas, even a grainy video of him yawning on my porch labeled evidence of aggressive behavior. The gallery chuckled. Even the stenographer hid a smile. When she finished, the judge turned to me. "Your response?" I rose slowly, opening my binder. "Your Honor, with respect, this isn't about rules. It's about power. It's about a president who thinks she can take what isn't hers." I laid out the evidence one by one. The animal control report clearing Lightning. The midnight photos of Karen trespassing. The signed breeding contract worth $50,000. And finally, the bylaws annotated by Frank proving that half of Karen's so-called rules had never been legally adopted. The judge flipped through the pages, his expression hardening. "Interesting," he murmured. Karen sputtered. "Lies, all of it. He forged those documents." I leaned forward, voice calm, cutting through her shrieks. "If I forged them, Your Honor, then why do the county clerk's official records match my copies word for word?" Frank rose from the gallery, cleared his throat, and held up the stamped originals. The courtroom went silent. The judge's gavel cracked again. "Enough! This court finds the HOA's claims without merit. Furthermore, this court notes credible evidence of harassment, trespassing, and possible fraud on the part of the HOA president. A referral will be made to the district attorney's office for review." The gallery erupted. Gasps, whispers, even a few claps before the bailiff barked for order. Karen's face drained of all color. Her clipboard slipped from her hands, clattering against the wooden floor. And Lightning? Though he wasn't there, I swear I could feel him purring in victory all the way from home. The courtroom's echoes still rang in my ears long after the gavel fell. Karen had come to bury me under fake bylaws and hollow accusations. Instead, she'd buried herself. But dismissal of the lawsuit was only the beginning. The real storm came when the district attorney's office opened an inquiry. Within days, subpoenas landed like thunderclaps. HOA records, bank statements, meeting minutes. Everything Karen thought she had buried under a mountain of clipboards was suddenly dragged into the light. The neighborhood buzzed. Some whispered about missing funds, others about Karen's nephew getting suspicious contracts, and a few muttered what I had suspected all along. Lightning hadn't just been a target of petty jealousy. Karen had seen him as a payday. The DA's office didn't move slowly. Within a week, investigators walked the cul-de-sac. Suits instead of uniforms, clipboards without HOA logos. They knocked on doors, asked questions, collected statements. Neighbors lined up to talk. Mrs. Dunbar told them about Karen's midnight rants, how she bragged about teaching the cat man a lesson. The Johnsons showed their phone videos of the safety patrol disaster. Even the mailman testified how Karen demanded he accidentally lose my certified letters. And then came the smoking gun. Frank, the retired county clerk, emerged again, this time with a manila folder thicker than Karen's ego. Inside were financial records he'd quietly pulled from county archives. Transfers, invoices, suspicious signatures, HOA money funneling into a landscaping company run by, no surprise, Karen's brother-in-law. When the DA's investigator asked Karen to explain the contracts, she snapped, "That's HOA business, private, but nothing is private when it's fraudulent." Word spread faster than wildfire. Neighbors who once trembled at Karen's clipboard now spoke her name with disgust. The same porch where she once handed out violation slips now hosted gatherings of residents comparing notes, pooling stories, sharing screenshots. The tipping point came at the next HOA meeting. The clubhouse smelled of burnt coffee and panic. Folding chairs filled with angry neighbors, phones poised to record. Karen stood at the front, still in her blazer, but the power had drained from her like water through a cracked cup. "I call this meeting to order," she began. "No!" someone shouted from the back. "You don't call anything anymore." Applause broke out. Another voice. "We know about the embezzlement, Karen." Her face tightened. "Lies, fabrications, this is a smear campaign." I stood then, binder in hand. The same binder that had survived trespassing, patrols, even court. I held it high, the weight of every receipt shining in the fluorescent light. "Not lies," I said. "Proof." I laid the documents on the table. Frank's records, the fake contracts, the video stills of Karen prowling at midnight, the sheriff's warning. The room grew louder with every page. Neighbors leaned in, gasps and murmurs crashing like waves. Even Karen's loyal board members slid their chairs back, distancing themselves inch by inch. Karen tried to grab the papers, but phones caught her every twitch. "This is a conspiracy," she screeched. "I am the HOA president." "No," Mrs. Dunbar's voice cut through, calm and sharp as glass. "You were." The room erupted in cheers. For the first time, Karen's clipboard clattered from her hands, hitting the floor like a dropped weapon, and then the doors opened. 2 DA investigators stepped in, badges flashing. The room fell silent as they approached the front. One of them, a tall woman with steel-gray eyes, spoke without ceremony. "Karen Dorsey, you are under investigation for fraud, embezzlement, and abuse of authority. You are ordered to step aside pending review." Gasps, shouts, the scrape of chairs. Karen's face went white, then red, then white again. "You can't do this. This is my community, mine." But nobody moved to help her. Not one board member, not one neighbor, not even the volunteers who once marched in her fake patrol. The investigators guided her out, her protests echoing through the hall. Phones followed, capturing every humiliating step. The room stayed silent for a long moment after the door slammed shut. Then someone started clapping, slow, steady. Others joined, and soon the entire room was on its feet, applauding not me, not lightning, but the end of Karen's reign. For the first time in years, the air in that clubhouse felt light, free. Lightning wasn't there, but I swear I could hear his purr in my chest. The day of the final hearing arrived under a sky so clear it almost felt rehearsed. The courthouse steps gleamed in the sunlight, and the crowd gathered outside wasn't just neighbors anymore. Local reporters clustered with cameras, microphones extended like spears. The words HOA scandal and embezzlement buzzing through the air. Karen arrived first, flanked by her lawyer, her once perfect hair now brittle under too much spray, her eyes darting like a cornered animal. The clipboard she once wielded like a weapon was gone. In its place, she clutched a wrinkled folder, thinner than the mountain of receipts she once buried others under. I arrived with Frank at my side, binder in hand. Lightning wasn't there, of course he was at home, perched in his favorite sunbeam, but his presence lingered in every whisper of the crowd. People wore shirts printed with his face. Kids held signs, "Justice for Lightning." My cat had become a symbol without even trying. Inside, the courtroom hummed with anticipation. The DA laid out their case with surgical precision. Financial transfers traced to Karen's brother-in-law, fake invoices, unauthorized bylaw amendments signed in secret sessions without quorum. And woven through it all, the story of one cat whose theft had unraveled an entire empire. Karen's lawyer tried to fight. "These are minor administrative errors," he insisted. "Not crimes." But the DA's voice was steady, cutting. "Errors don't explain $200,000 missing from community funds. Errors don't explain falsified signatures. Errors don't explain a president trespassing in the dead of night to steal a neighbor's property." The judge listened quietly, eyes sharp as blades. When Karen finally took the stand, her voice cracked. "I did it for the community," she insisted. That cat was a nuisance, flaunted in everyone's faces. He was a distraction from the rules. "From order!" The gallery erupted in murmurs. Someone shouted, "You mean from your control?" Karen flinched, her eyes darting wildly. For the first time, she looked small. Not the queen of clipboards, not the tyrant of bylaws, just a desperate woman whose grip on power had turned to ash. When my turn came, I didn't rant. I didn't raise my voice. I simply placed Lightning's champion ribbon on the table, alongside the binder. "This was never about a cat," I said, my voice calm but carrying through the room. This was about control. Karen thought she could steal, lie, and intimidate. But truth, like lightning, always lands on its feet. The judge leaned back, hands folded. Silence hung in the air, heavy as stone. Then came the verdict. This court finds Karen Dorsey guilty of fraud, embezzlement, and abuse of authority. Restitution will be paid directly from her personal assets to the homeowners of Maple Ridge. The HOA board is hereby dissolved, pending reorganization under independent oversight. The gavel cracked, and with that sound, years of fear shattered. Neighbors hugged. Reporters rushed out with headlines already writing themselves. Karen slumped in her chair, her empire gone, her legacy reduced to a cautionary tale. Outside, the cul-de-sac felt transformed. The air lighter, the laughter freer. Kids ran with Lightning as he strutted across the grass, tail high, fur glowing in the sun. Someone set up a grill, and before long, the smell of burgers filled the air. A block party without permission slips. Mrs. Dunbar raised her glass of lemonade. "To Lightning, the cat who freed us all!" Cheers erupted. Lightning meowed as if accepting the toast, then leapt onto the picnic table, stretching like a champion acknowledging his people. Phones captured the moment, and by nightfall, the image had gone viral. A golden Maine coon basking in sunlight, a neighborhood united around him. The caption reading, "You can't put a price on truth." Weeks later, restitution checks arrived. Not enough to erase every wrong Karen had done, but enough to remind us that justice had teeth. The HOA reformed under new leadership, transparency rules locked into place, and on the very first official meeting of the new board, a motion passed unanimously. Lightning shall forever be exempt from all HOA pet restrictions. He had earned his freedom. As for Karen, she moved out quietly. Her Lexus gone from the cul-de-sac, her name whispered only in cautionary tales. Some said she tried to start fresh in another town. Others swore they saw her still clutching a clipboard, scribbling rules nobody cared to follow. But for us, the chapter had closed, and every time Lightning curled beside me, purring softly, his champion ribbon hanging in the window, I remembered how close we came to losing him and how his presence revealed what power really looks like. Not fear, not control, but truth, carried by one golden cat who proved that justice always, always lands on its feet.